You're listening to The Fix with Ryan Rothstein, live from the PropSwap studios of AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. PropSwap that ticket and cash in while the odds have improved. Once again, here's Ryan.
Yes, sir. It's the local hour tonight to lead off the show on Hump Day. Live in the PropSwap studios, AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Thanks again to Kai Carlin for kicking things off with me tonight to talk some hoops. Now let's transition to the gridiron and talk some Eagles and NFL with our insider, John McMullen. Follow John at JF McMullen on Twitter, PhillyVoice.com, SI.com, and host of Extending the Play every Saturday, 10 a.m. to 11. John, we missed out on the James Harden sweepstakes. You and I are the only ones that seem to care.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. I'm willing to give Daryl Morey the benefit of the doubt. I mean, he knows James Harden better than anybody. But I got to tell you, Ryan, I mean, 8-time All-Star, 3-time scoring champion, MVP. Let's not give up a rookie role player who had some numbers in a COVID-19 game. What in the world?
It's
unbelievable. You think you're getting a player like that without giving up assets. I mean, it is unbelievable to me. But like I said, I mean, if you want to talk about him being out of shape, if you want to talk about his attitude on his way out of Houston, those are legitimate concerns and criticisms. And like I said, I'm willing to give Daryl the benefit of the doubt, but I mean, we can't give up a rookie and a defensive specialist. And I'm not talking about Ben Simmons. Obviously, you got to give up Ben Simmons as the centerpiece, but role players, Steibel. I mean, I don't understand this fan base. And my prediction was, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a rant.
No, I love it. Go.
If they would have watched James Harden and Joel Embiid together for 10 minutes,
yes,
they would have changed their tune. Every single one of them.
Every single one. That is the only and I shouldn't say only reason because I'm not going to act too petty, but I was like, man, I want this deal to happen so bad because I was confident in my opinion and assessment. And I said this today with Rich Q after the trade. I was on Back Your Play Tuesdays and Wednesdays 4 to 6 here on 1490. But he was like, oh, man, you must be salty now. And I was like, no. I'm not salty.
I'm not salty.
I was like, I just right. I know that an elite scoring ball handler with Embiid would make this team better than it is with Ben Simmons having the ball in his hands. And it's not an indictment on Ben Simmons. That's just the reality. So I would have loved to see all these people shut up and be forced to cheer that on.
Yeah, because it would have been great. It would have been, and look, I don't even think they win a championship with that. I just think they're a heck of a lot closer. That's how you have to play in this league. You need guys who can finish down the stretch.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is a finisher, and people can point out that he hasn't won a championship. And yes, okay, who has on this team? I don't.
Dwight Howard.
Understand it, and this youth, man, it's like. In the NFL, and we'll have to shift to that. Unfortunately, I'd like to talk about this all night, but
I know.
You know, people talk about draft picks, and I'm like, man, if you got a proven player, pick the proven player.
Exactly.
I will never understand it. Now, it's not that simple. As again, you know, obviously people do decline, and he hasn't kept himself in shape. And as I said, all that stuff is legitimate, but. This is I hate this term, but I'm going to use it. This is a generational scorer.
Yeah.
This is one of the purest, greatest scorers in NBA history. This is like a 50 home run hitter. So you can talk about a five-tool player. I'm going to use the Jim Schwartz baseball analogy. Who plays great shortstop and can steal 20 bases and hits 300 and hits 20 home runs. But guess what? Give me the 50 home run guy.
Right.
Because he's going to have more of an impact on the game. And it's always been that way. and it's always going to be that way. And that's what James Harden is when he's clicking on all cylinders. And he'd be obviously the best scorer in this town since Allen Iverson. People seem to like him. He had flaws.
Exactly. Yeah, that's perfect way to end it. And I'll just throw this added thing to it. I don't even want you to respond because we have to shift to NFL, like you said. But it's like the baseball argument where people say, you have an opportunity to get Garrett Cole, making this up, but you have to trade away some prospects. And it's like
yeah, exactly.
The prospects, 95% of the prospects don't pan out. You want to hold on to them like it's an Apple stock from 15 years ago. Like, what are you talking about? You're screaming about prospects. It's laughable.
Yeah, it's maddening. And you're going to see it. It always happens in the NFL draft where everybody, you get to the combine and there's 60 first-round picks. And then you get to see everybody's so excited to see Jalen Reagor right up until they see Jalen Reagor. And they go, what the hell is wrong with the coaching staff?
Right.
Well, maybe he can't run a route. That's why.
Oh, man. All right, let's get to the NFL and the Eagles. Busy in their head coaching search, so why don't you fill us in? I know there was a meeting with a particular defensive coordinator down in Florida.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I think a lot of people thought the New York Jets were going to lock things down with Robert Saleh today. They had a second interview, and all of a sudden it didn't happen, and he's whisking off to South Florida to see Jeffrey Lurie, who's down in Palm Beach away from all the angst in Philadelphia that is being pointed at him these days. And two interviews today. They also interviewed Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator in Carolina, and obviously a lot of people remember him from LSU even more so. But and Arthur Smith is going to be tomorrow. And as I just said, I pointed to the 2016 search. The Eagles had 6 interviews. It was Deuce Staley, Pat Shurmur, Adam Gase, Ben McAdoo, Doug Peterson, Tom Coughlin. Those were the 6 interviews. And I think if you look back in hindsight on that, it's not too exciting, other than the guy they ultimately lucked out and hired. So I wouldn't get too high with any of these names. I wouldn't get too low. But I will say this, they're working from the same list as everybody else. So for all the talk of innovative and forward-thinking, guess what? There's 7 teams looking for a head coach. 6 of them interviewed Robert Saleh. Brady's had multiple interviews. Smith is interviewing with 4 teams over a 2-day period. They're working on the same list as everybody else. So this nonsense about innovation, groupthink like everybody else.
Yeah, it's just a revolving door, and it's just passing off from one job to the next. But who is Robert Saleh? For the average fan, we know he's the big jacked guy that we often see when the Niners play on national television next to Shanahan as the DC. But he reminds me of a Vrabel type of potential head coach. What can he bring, your opinion, as a head coach, John?
Well, and I think, the one thing everybody says about Robert is leadership, is energy. So I think that part's really good because I think that's the most important part. I've said that consistently through the Doug Peterson regime. I think the ability to lead people, manage people is much more important than scheme, but everybody gets mucked up in scheme. And that's the interesting part because guess what Robert Saleh is scheme-wise? He's going to run the wide 9 up front, the dreaded wide 9 that everyone hates, and Jim Schwartz is an idiot. He runs the same thing, and he backs it up with cover 3, which people are going to hate even more than what Jim did. But guess what? In San Francisco, when Nick Bosa showed up, that wide 9 looked pretty darn good. So it's always about, I constantly say this as well, Ryan, it's always about who your players are, who your personnel is. And you go back to a guy like Adam Gase, I talked about him in 2016. he was the hottest candidate on the market. It wasn't just the Eagles. The Eagles wanted him. He was the first major interview. They interviewed Deuce before, obviously, in-house, because remember, they fired Chip Kelly early, so they were able to get, unfortunately, the Rooney Rule candidate, because let's be honest, Deuce didn't have a real shot to get the job. And then they also interviewed Pat Shurmur because he was the interim coach. But their first real interview was Gase, and they wanted to bring him back for the second interview, and by that point he had demanded control over the 53-man roster. The Eagles weren't willing to give him that, and he got it in Miami. And we all know he's turned into basically the punchline of a joke as the Jets coach recently fired. But if you think about Adam Gase, what made Adam Gase? Peyton Manning. What made Robert Saleh? Nick Bosa. What made, I think the best example of this, because he got 117 jobs off this, was Norv Turner, who was made by Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin. And for years, I always joked it was an indictable offense to criticize Norv Turner, who was terrible as a head coach, as an offensive coordinator, in multiple jobs. So don't get too high, don't get too low. But I will say the Eagles are working off the same list as everybody else.
Where do you expect these head coaches to fall here? And I know that's a big ask for you to predict that, but it's more in regards to you mentioning the same candidates getting interviewed for all these different jobs, and it's always just swapping of head coaches. There's really no innovation. So where do these guys end up is the question, I guess.
Well, I think when the first domino starts to fall, that's when other teams start to get jittery. It's almost comical. The same thing happens every time. The same thing happens every year. And it's usually the same amount of teams. It's usually 6, 7, at the most 8. It's almost hilarious how the same cycle repeats itself. And as I mentioned, you have the same guys. Each year you have the hot candidates. I'll give Jimmy Kempski credit for this because he tweeted, but I always think the same thing. If you've ever seen Zoolander, Mugatu, who's Will Ferrell, says,
yep.
He's talking about Hansel, who was Owen Wilson. He said, that Hansel's so hot right now as a male model. That's what these coaches are. Oh, Robert Saleh's so hot right now. That's what it reminds me of. And generally, again, it's the talent that they have at their coordinator spots that makes them and turns them into this. But I thought Saleh was going to be that first domino, and I thought he was going to go to the Jets, and that's still a possibility. And then when you see the other dominoes start to fall, I know Deshaun Watson is working very hard to get Eric Bieniemy in Houston, and I don't think he's going to be relevant here. I think for the offensive coaches' perspective, I think they would all want the Chargers first because of Justin Herbert. And then you're talking about the Arthur Smiths of the world, the Joe Brady's of the world. I think that would be their preferred landing spot. And again, everybody's interviewing in all these spots. And then you talk about the leftovers. So I think it's going to, for the Eagles in 2016, they wanted Gase, they didn't get him. They wanted Ben McAdoo, they didn't get him. And then they had to go the leftovers. And at the very end, we're debating a 70-year-old Tom Coughlin and Doug Peterson. And they ultimately made the right decision. I think it's going to be like that again this time around. I think it's going to be the leftovers once those three teams pick. And Jacksonville is an outlier because they're a disaster. I mean, they're going all in on Urban Meyer, and if they don't get him, we'll see what direction they go. But the Eagles aren't a desirable spot right now because of the ownership and the GM and the fact that it's pretty evident they're not going to be offering any kind of significant power. So you're probably looking at, and I've said it, I think, pretty consistently, you're probably looking at either a first-time coach that will be willing to have coordinators hired for him, or the safety net, which would always be Deuce Staley.
What are the chances Doug Peterson takes a year off?
I think very good. I think I've mentioned from the start the timing really hurt Doug. I mean, teams were deep into these hiring processes after Black Monday, and a lot of them have already done all their due diligence and are into, as I mentioned today, Sal is already in the second interviews with the Jets, and other people are set up. Arthur already had 2 interviews, I think, with the Falcons, so he's already in that second interview phase. So almost all of these teams, in fact, except the Eagles and Jaguars, are deep into the process, and Jacksonville, because they focused on one guy, that's the only reason they're not as deep into it. So it's going to be difficult from a timing standpoint. So I think the smart thing is for Doug Peterson to sit out a year for 2 reasons. One, he's under contract for 2 more years with the Eagles, so Jeffrey's got to pay him to sit at home. And secondly, he will have a better chance with a more open landscape and next year, because, as I said, like clockwork, it'll be 6, 7, 8 teams, and he'll be, from day one on people's minds.
What are the chances the Eagles get a wide receiver with the number 6 pick? Devontae Smith being the guy.
I think they're very good. I don't think it's going to be Devontae Smith because there's a lot of recency bias, and obviously playing so explosively on the biggest stage in college football, winning the Heisman. I think NFL executives, especially if you think about it, when you're at the top of the draft, you're bad teams, and bad teams usually means bad organizations. So, and by the way, I'm not saying he's a bad player. He's a great player. He's worthy of being a top 5 pick. But I think, if you didn't have that, most people would say Ja'Marr Chase was a little bit better. But I think that's kind of flip-flopped. And by a little bit better, I mean projecting at the NFL level. And I think that's kind of flip-flop now. So both of those guys have a chance to go top 5. And I think Chase is the only one that could potentially fall to the Eagles at 6. And if he's there at 6, they better think about taking him.
Yeah, that's going to be, we'll be talking plenty about that as the draft inches closer. Talking with John McMullen, our NFL Eagles insider, at JF McMullen on Twitter. John, we have about 5-10 minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about the NFL divisional weekend here. Over the past 9 years, there's only been 2 years where the home teams went 4-0. There's been a year that they went 2-2. And then 6 times there's been a 3-1 record in favor of the home team. So I ask you, who's the road team this weekend that you feel confident is going to walk out with a win?
Well, I will say, I've been saying this all year. This is, and the statistics bear it out now. I mean, this is, home field advantage has not existed this year because of COVID-19. And it's basically the least home field advantage and certainly the Super Bowl era. And it has been that way all season. Now, the difficulties, what shifts things a little bit this week is you have Buffalo, obviously, potentially a snow game as the weather still probably a little bit too early, and you have Green Bay, which is always the potential of just awful cold, and that does become a little bit of a home field advantage, even in this type of environment. So I do think that could shift things towards the home team, and likely will. And then you talk about Kansas City, such a dominant team, and it's hard to imagine anybody beating them at this point outside of a disastrous COVID situation or a disastrous injury. That's probably not going to happen at practice. So you start to think about who could lose. And, the one team I look at that I kind of mentioned is, I think, a little bit overrated and wasn't going to matter in the first round because the Bears are so terrible and shouldn't be in the playoffs. But that would be New Orleans to me. I don't think they're nearly as good as people think they are.
Yeah, and you and I have been on the same page with that for a little bit now. And that's a 3-point spread, the slight favorite in favor of the Saints for being at home. Then you have the Ravens and the Bills. That's down to 2.5. So those games are really tough to predict. And then you have the bigger spread games with the Rams at Lambeau, about a touchdown, and then Browns and Chiefs at 10. The Rams are interesting to me, John, and this just seems like the Packers' year. Aaron Rodgers is unbelievable per usual, but the Rams' defense impressed me last week, and I don't know what your thoughts are if there's any chance the Rams can go into Lambeau and come out of there with a win.
I am very interested to see that game because that is, to me, that is the best defense in the NFL this season. And we talk about people doing the same stuff. And I mentioned, Robert Saleh running, cover 3 beyond line 9. Brandon Staley does some different things. And, he's almost brought the Sean McVay mentality of offense to the defensive side of the football. And by that, I mean, and I don't like this because I think I talk about it all the time from an aesthetic standpoint. It just tries to play numbers, which tends to look like ugly football, but it's worked. And it's maybe it's a flash in the pan, but it's worked in the short term. And it's going to be interesting because it has been nearly impossible to stop Aaron Rodgers. And ultimately, I think, look, even if you do a good job against them, the Packers are going to score a lot. And, if you give up 28, for instance, that's good. So can you score 30? And it's interesting, for the Rams, as Sean McVay has gotten there, it's been the offense. Now the strength of that team is clearly the defense. And I don't know if they're capable, certainly with Jared Goff not healthy. And by the way, I mean, he wanted to play John Wolford even if he was healthy, which tells you he's kind of out of, he doesn't believe in his quarterback. I don't know if they're capable of scoring that many points. So they would need a Herculean effort to beat the Packers in my mind.
Last one here before I let you go, John. Is there any chance that McVay wants out of L.A., really for the reason that you just mentioned?
I don't think so. I mean, it's always frustrating. I mean, same thing we talked about with Doug, with Carson. It's not that bad, but it's at least somewhat similar. But if you're a head coach, I mean, you're gonna go through these cycles, and you kind of have to understand that. And I think he understands that. And The interesting thing is, how do you get out of that type of contract if you really don't believe in the quarterback? And maybe it is simply the injury. But, Sean McVay deserves some criticism as well because, when you have a good idea, and we saw it here with Chip Kelly, and obviously Sean's known for all that pre-snap motion and movement and sort of eyewash, and then people adjust. You have to adjust back. So it's, he's got to shift some things as well. And I think it was Ben Fennell who tweeted this, so I'll give him credit. It's interesting. For instance, nobody uses RPOs less than the Rams. Nobody. And it's a ridiculous number of less than 2%. And, that's part of modern football. And so, he's got to figure out a way how to do some different things and just not keep rolling the same thing. And if you go back to the Super Bowl, that's a perfect example. I mean, Belichick had a beat on him. It was just 11 personnel the whole game. He never changed. He never shifted. So that's a concern with the head coach as well.
John McMullen, our NFL Eagles insider, for his nightly appearance on The Fix every night at 10:30. Follow John at JF McMullen, PhillyVoice.com, SI.com, and every Saturday at 10 a.m., host of Extending the Play. All right, John, I appreciate it. We'll do it again tomorrow.
Hey, thanks, Ryan.
Yep, thank you. Good stuff from John, as always. Nothing new. All right, let's get to a break. 1 hour down just like that. 11 p.m., we have Kelly Bidlin from the VSiN Network. You may hear Kelly every night, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., primetime action before The Fix goes live. We'll talk NFL and best bets for this weekend, his thoughts, maybe squeeze in some NBA. Stick around.